you ever wondered what a truly free and just society would look like, not just in theory, but in practice? Today, we're exploring how communities worldwide are turning radical ideas into transformative action. Welcome to A Podcast for Radicals, part of a Guide for Radicals series. I'm your host, Jason Bayless. If you're new here, a brief introduction. A Radical Guide is a global project amplifying voices for justice, liberation, and collective action. Originally a directory of radical locations, it has grown into a platform for education, organizing, and mutual aid. Through it, we connect people to movements, radical spaces, and histories of resistance, encouraging solidarity across borders and struggles. A Guide for Radicals is a key resource exploring the history and evolution of systemic change, linking theory to action. It challenges systems of oppression like capitalism, patriarchy, and colonialism, while offering alternatives rooted in justice, autonomy, and mutual aid. This guide focuses on understanding theory and transforming theoretical knowledge into practical action. In today's episode, we're focusing on the principles and practices of liberation, what liberation means, how it addresses systemic injustice, and the foundational principles that guide transformative change. Let's dive in. What do we mean by liberation? Liberation involves dismantling oppressive systems that limit individual and community freedom and well-being based on race, gender, class, and other identities. It requires resisting visible injustices and dismantling the structures that perpetuate inequality. Liberation asks us to envision and create systems that empower and sustain communities, providing the foundation for lasting change. To understand liberation fully, we think about it in three interconnected dimensions: social, personal, and spiritual. Social liberation involves addressing systemic inequalities and creating institutions that reflect collective well-being. Personal liberation means unlearning internalized oppression and reclaiming our autonomy and dignity. And then there's spiritual liberation, which is about ethical growth and collective compassion, grounding our actions in values that sustain and inspire us. These dimensions aren't isolated, they enrich and reinforce one another. For example, personal liberation often strengthens social efforts by helping us confront internalized biases, while spiritual liberation offers the ethical foundation to sustain collective action. Together, these dimensions form a cohesive approach to transformative change. We'll explore them further in future episodes, but for now, I want you to think of them as foundational to everything we'll discuss. Liberation is not just an idea, it's a practice we can see in action. None of the examples we'll discuss are perfect. As with everything, there are flaws and shortcomings. However, what they all represent is a commitment to striving toward liberation. Let's look at three movements that embody these principles and offer lessons for today. First, the Zapatista Movement in Chiapas, Mexico. Emerging in 1994 with the uprising against the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, this indigenous-led movement redefined governance by establishing autonomous zones based on direct democracy and mutual aid. They created education systems that honor indigenous knowledge and developed economic practices rooted in collective ownership. The Zapatistas show us that liberation thrives when grounded in local conditions and cultural traditions, inspiring movements worldwide. Next, we turn to Catalonia during the Spanish Civil War. Sparked in 1936 by a military coup against Spain's democratic government, the war created a unique moment where workers managed their own factories and farms, local assemblies made decisions, and resources like food and healthcare were shared through community networks. While the Spanish Civil War ended tragically, Catalonia's experiment lives on. Today, Barcelona hosts over 4,000 cooperatives influenced by these principles. This example proves that large-scale grassroots systems can create equity and participation. Finally, consider Rojava Democratic Confederalism in northern Syria, a region situated at the crossroads of geopolitical tensions and home to a predominantly Kurdish population. Established during the Syrian Civil War in 2012, Rojava's governance is based on principles of grassroots democracy, gender equity, and ecological sustainability. Here, decisions flow through neighborhood communes and councils, ensuring grassroots democracy. Gender equity and ecological responsibility are central to their governance, integrating feminist principles with environmental care. Rojava demonstrates how addressing multiple oppressions simultaneously creates inclusive and transformative models of liberation. For example, their commitment to gender equity ensures women's voices are central to decision making, while their ecological governance prioritizes sustainable practices. These elements illustrate how systemic liberation can align diverse priorities into cohesive, impactful frameworks. These examples highlight liberation in action, but how do we apply these principles in our daily lives? Let's discuss some practical pathways. Mutual aid is one way. Unlike charity, which often creates a dynamic of giver and receiver, mutual aid is about solidarity and collective care. It recognizes that everyone has needs and resources to contribute, fostering shared responsibility and collective strength. Organizations like Food Not Bombs and NorCal Resist have shown how communities can support each other while building collective power. Start by mapping your community's resources and needs. What gaps can you help fill? For example, imagine starting a neighborhood tool sharing program. It could begin with just a few families pooling resources like lawnmowers or power tools to save money and reduce waste while fostering stronger community ties. Or consider organizing a community garden. A vacant lot can become a shared space where neighbors grow food, learn from one another, and build a sense of collective purpose. These everyday actions show how the principles of mutual aid and cooperation can take root in simple, practical ways. Then there are worker cooperatives. Rainbow Grocery in San Francisco, a worker owned cooperative since 1975, shows how democratic workplaces can thrive while prioritizing fairness and community. Explore existing cooperatives in your area or consider transforming traditional businesses into worker owned enterprises. Finally, think about reclaiming land for community benefit. The Sogoreate Land Trust, led by indigenous women, restores Chochenyo and Carcan-Ohlone lands in the San Francisco Bay Area. Through their Shumi land tax, non-indigenous residents can contribute to decolonization and sustainable stewardship. Learn about indigenous-led land initiatives near you and find ways to get involved. Liberation challenges us to engage with the world differently. It begins by examining the systemic inequalities shaping our lives and communities, identifying where power dynamics perpetuate harm, and finding meaningful ways to disrupt them. It's about building relationships rooted in solidarity and mutual aid, actively participating in collective efforts that address shared needs while fostering interdependence. Liberation also asks us to reflect on internalized biases and make choices that align our daily actions with liberation-focused practices. Together, these efforts lay the groundwork for a more just and equitable world. As Audre Lorde, an activist and writer whose work has inspired countless movements for justice, reminds us, revolution is not a one-time event. Liberation is the continuous work of creating, learning, and building together. The movements we discussed earlier, the Zapatistas, Catalonia, Rojava, and the local efforts like mutual aid networks, worker cooperatives, and land reclamation projects all illustrate this ongoing process. While no model is perfect, each step, whether feeding neighbors, transforming workplaces, or restoring land, adds to a collective journey toward justice and equity. As we wrap up, I invite you to reflect on how you're engaging with liberation principles. Are there mutual aid networks near you? What opportunities exist to support or create democratic structures? How can you contribute to Indigenous-led efforts to restore stewardship of the land? Share your stories with us using the hashtag #ARadicalGuide to connect with others. These reflections tie directly into A Guide for Radicals, where you can explore these topics further. Visit radicalguide.com to dive deeper into these ideas and find additional resources to support your journey. Thank you for joining me on this sixth episode of A Podcast for Radicals. Before we go, let's quickly touch on a few key terms we discussed today. Mutual aid, for example, is all about solidarity, working together to meet shared needs without reinforcing hierarchies. Worker cooperatives are businesses owned and managed collectively by their workers, ensuring fairness and shared decision-making. And liberation? It's the process of freeing ourselves and our communities from oppressive systems while building just alternatives. You can learn more about these ideas by visiting A Guide for Radicals at radicalguide.com. Next time, we'll explore understanding systems of oppression and examine the cycle of socialization and its role in sustaining inequality. You won't want to miss it. Until then, keep working together, keep resisting, and remember, follow ideas, not people.